So welcome everyone to Circle 2C of this year's Indigenous Math Education Symposium. My name is Janice, and along with Stephanie, we are helping to host this circle. We will have two presenters during this session. So each presenter will have about 10 minutes to speak, followed by some time for questions and conversation. And I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional and unceded lands and waters of the Hunkaminam people, and would like to invite you to join in the chat and introduce yourself and where you're joining us from.
Yeah, quite interesting. I feel.
And we will begin with, and we'll just ask everyone to mute right now while the speakers are sharing, and we can unmute when it comes time to ask questions and engage in conversation. So our first speaker is Judith, and she is joining us from the University of Waterloo. And I was telling her earlier that, over the years, we've drawn upon so many of the problems from the University of Waterloo and the resources. So looking forward to hearing about problems with purpose today. Over to you, Judith.
Thank you very much. So my name is Judith. I'm a settler. My pronouns are she or they. I've just put a link in the chat for some of what I'm going to talk about. I'll try to get the slides into the chat at the end so that you have all the links. I just want to acknowledge the territory that I am on, which is the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And the University of Waterloo's main campus is on the Haldimand Tract, which is land that was granted and given to the Six Nations. And that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. I've got some photos there of what a beautiful place this is. And I just wanted to acknowledge a little bit more personally, one theme I'll mention about is language, and acknowledging how vital language is as a part of culture and how colonialism has actively suppressed Indigenous languages. And there are lots of examples of ways that math and computer science can have an impact, positive and negative, on Indigenous languages. And I've got a couple things here, a keyboard for the Cree group of languages, an app for the Kuga language, which is a local language here, and big tech interacting with Indigenous languages. So within the University of Waterloo, I work for the Center for Education in Mathematics and Computing. We're kind of an enrichment branch of the Faculty of Math at the University of Waterloo, and we try to inspire students to go further with math and computer science. Our typical focus is grades 4 to 12, although we are trying to get some traction with the younger grades. We visit schools for free and do workshops in person and online. We offer free courseware from grades 7 to 12.
I'm not going to the basement.
We have an online Master of Math teachers program, and with scholarships available to folks with connections to Indigenous communities. I think somebody else's mic is on. I'm just hearing some background noise.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to mute them, Judith. I'm going through the list and muting everybody. Sorry.
And anyway, so we have lots of resources, and you can visit that there. One of the big things that we do is create a lot of math problems. And about me personally, I've been a professor at the CEMC for a little over 20 years. I've done math and outreach sessions in many, many schools internationally. I've visited Indigenous communities, and I've done lots of other kind of math enrichment things. In the top right, that's a badge with Girl Guides. So the project I want to talk about today is called Problems with Purpose. And we've talked with a lot of teachers who are Indigenous and who teach in Indigenous communities about how we could support the calls of the TRC within the things that we do. One thing we heard a lot was students saying, why would we use this in the real world? And that came up in the circle sessions in the previous set. We heard about the importance of math through hands-on activities, concrete connections to the world, and experiencing math as a tool that helps communities. And so what we did was create a collection of mathematical problems that can be used in grades 4 to 12. And they're meant to highlight the connection between math and our responsibility to the present and future generations. So I've put this link in the chat. I'll tell you a little bit about it, and then if you want to download them, you can. They're free. There are 2 volumes right now of math problems. We've got them indexed according to the real world application, the grades that they're relevant to, and a lot of math keywords to help teachers kind of plug them into what you're doing in your classroom. So this is our first volume and our second volume. We've released these within the last year. And I just want to tell you, I want to highlight a couple of the problems in this set. We commissioned a local Indigenous photographer named Bangishimo, who is a powerhouse locally. We've worked with them through our Indigenous Students Center at the University of Waterloo. They're a big advocate for land back and have been an activist with a local land back camp. And they have a lot of amazing exhibits. So we commissioned Bangishimo to take some photos for us. And then this is one of the math problems that we've made based on that. The photo in this is of a building on campus that Bangishimo took, and we made a pattern problem to do with installing bird safe coating on the building's windows and how much that would cost. And coincidentally, there was some bird safe coating being installed in our buildings on campus just as we released this. Another one is a collaboration with Dr. Edward Doolittle, who's a faculty member at First Nations University in Saskatchewan, but is originally from the Six Nations and territory where we are. I invited him to be with us today, but he's involved in another event. He has used graph theory to analyze the Cree language, and I've got a link and a screenshot from a talk he gave about a decade ago. And what you see on the left are a bunch of words in a Cree dialect, and every word is connected by a line to a word that differs by just one letter. And he generously shared with me pages and pages of these graphs that he's done to analyze the Cree language. Well, it's a group of dialects, but I'm going to just say Cree language, understanding that that's many. So here's some things about Dr. Edward Doolittle. We've got a word search on the left that he created and shared with me, and an article from CBC News about creating a Scrabble game in the Cree language. He calls it Screeble. So we wanted to shine a light on the work that he's doing, which is really incredible work. And we created a puzzle for grades 4 to 6, a Cree word tree puzzle. So we've got a link where students can see a couple of words in Cree spoken. We've got a link to the talk that Ed Doolittle did. We describe what a word tree is, and we've got an example here where each subsequent word differs from the previous word in exactly one letter. You can see how it's highlighted. So we're sort of setting the students up, and then we have these activities for them to do to go down the word tree and show which letter changed. Then part 2 to fill in the word tree so that it's exactly one letter changing in each subsequent word. And then the extra challenge to take a long word tree and see which words could come out and still leave you with a word tree. I don't have the solutions in the slide, but we do give them in the document. We've had lots of advisors, both from Indigenous community members and teachers who teach in Indigenous communities. So I want to hold up those people who contributed to this work, and lots of my colleagues. That's my timer going off. Let's see if I can turn that off. I want to hold up all the people that worked on this, recognizing the fine line between shining a light on what people are doing and appropriation. We're hoping to continue to release these a couple volumes a year. So if anybody is doing something that you'd like us to shine a light on that maybe we can feature in a future one, please contact me. And I just wanted to show a few more samples here just to kind of give you a feel. We've got a way of estimating tree height by bending down and looking between your legs. We've got estimating polar bear, the population size of polar bears. We've got something where you go out and sample plants using these frames and something about if there's been bear sightings, locating where the bear is most likely to be. So just to give you a feel for that. And that's it. I'm ready to take questions if you're ready for that.
Great. Thank you so much, Judith. Maybe we can stop sharing your screen so that we can see you and invite others to share some connections or questions that they have to the work that Judith has shared.
Hi, Judith. I have a quick question. I'm someone who's very familiar with like the Waterloo problems of the week. Is the department or area that you work have any connections to that, or is it separate?
Yeah.
And sorry if I missed at the beginning.
No, that's okay. We have a group, we have about 40 employees in the CEMC, and we're the same group that makes the problem of the week.
Okay.
One of my collaborators on this project, Christine Vender, is one of the main forces behind Problem of the Week. And when we started this project out, we involved several people from Problem of the Week.
Cool. No, I think it's really neat because I'm just getting into kind of in our district, helping to brainstorm and come up with questions. So I can imagine that you might have inspiration from different angles of sometimes it's like you say, like hearing about an area that you'd like to spread the light on or investigate.
Yeah.
And other times it might start as a math angle, but I feel like it's almost easier to, zoom in on the Indigenous connection first and then unpack what mathematics is under there maybe, but it might be, you might not have a process, or do you have a way that you approach it?
We did a lot of brainstorming. We took a big set of problems. We realized some of them were maybe, we wanted to have a positive, we wanted people to feel enabled and powerful doing the mathematics. We wanted the difficulty level to be right. We didn't want it to be too wordy. We wanted a range of age groups. So, we have really whittled things down to try to keep what's the best. And then, one of the problems we have is we found some materials online about fish wheels used around fishing practices, and so that was a really interesting one to do as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the question.
And I think, Judith, you raised this interesting, I think, conundrum that many teachers that don't have Indigenous ancestry face, and you talked about appropriation and, working alongside and with Indigenous educators. And I think sometimes problems don't necessarily have to be indigenized, but they can be decolonized. And so, we can make connections to community and place, through different lenses. And so I think there's lots of different ways to think about making problems authentic and connected for our students, which I think is part of what your project is looking at doing.
I really like how you've put that. Yeah, because it is really tricky. Like, we don't want to be appropriating knowledge that we don't have, and we don't want to be, we're not in a community teaching that tradition, but and we do want to shine a light on colonialism, but in a way that's, still centered in, empowering students and the vision of what could be coming.
I'm noticing in the chat that people are sharing, they found some of your resources online and they're sharing amongst each other. That's wonderful. Laura, did you want to jump into the conversation and share some of the connections you're making? Train noise. Okay, so she's saying that she's co-learning with 8 and 9-year-olds on Treaty 13, and with a very diverse population, and just hoping to center them in mathematical learning, while also introducing them to authentic Indigenous thinking in math, science, language, arts. So again, we often think of the University of Waterloo and your problems as more senior for our students, but really there's another Sarah Wong mentioned, she could see this in primary, the connections that she's making across the grades. So again, that idea of the lens that you use to design these tasks and problems, I think is far reaching. So thank you.
Well, thanks. And one thing I've loved about participating in this event over the years is just seeing kind of in the younger grades how many different places, you can take addition, you can take algebra, you can take patterning in so many different directions. It's a little harder to do that with parabolas.
Yeah.
I'm just really inspired by what everybody's doing here. So thanks.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Judith. I think we'll move on to our second speaker. And I think we have a team joining us for the second session of this circle, Johanna and Brandi and Rose. Just going to turn to Johanna here. There we go.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes, it sounds great. Thank you, Johanna.
Alrighty. Okay, so our Rose is not here today, it's just Brandi and I. Our presentation is talking about incorporating Indigenous approaches to literacy and numeracy using authentic Indigenous resources. This was a workshop presentation that Brandi and I hosted for our school district professional development day. We are both Indigenous district teachers, specifically supporting Indigenous students with literacy and numeracy. However, I also support students with graduation. So we're very busy. Before continuing on, I would like to quickly acknowledge that Brandi and I come to you with this knowledge from the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh traditional unceded territories, also known as North Vancouver. So we are working in the North Vancouver School District. And quick introductions for myself. Hello, I am an Indigenous educator. My family comes from Bella Bella, and I am currently learning my language, Heiltsuk. And it's a joy to bring in knowledges that I do know and can share. Brandi, if you're there, did you want to self-introduce?
Yeah, Gilkas la dokolo nuko Brandi Gaiklin la dokolutin glo wai Gaiklin la kwakwakiwak Gyoklin la Nilti. So just introducing myself in my Kwakwala language. I am Brandi. I'm from the villages of Cape Mudge. My dad's family comes from Kinkham Inlet. And I am an Indigenous literacy teacher in the North Van School District. And yeah, it's been great exploring this topic with Johanna and sharing our presentation on the Prodi Day a few weeks ago.
Kasika. So we began justifying our approach to numeracy with the use of stories, because when it comes to stories, Indigenous people recognize that story connects not just the story itself, but it holds cultural worldviews, it holds our approaches to land, to our approaches to the world. Everything overlaps. So the idea of finding math in stories, because it is all there anyway, is kind of like a good in for teachers who may feel unprepared to start talking about Indigenous approaches to learning. This is kind of like a good first step. It's a good intro. Be like, okay, yeah, we're all on our learning journey, and it's okay that you might be emerging into this kind of space. But a good way to start is by looking at authentic Indigenous texts. So, hold on. There we go. So specifically authentic, because we have a long history that is still continuing of people who are sharing Indigenous stories, whereas they might not have good connections with community or with culture. And one really good quick way to evaluate your resources is to consider, is this an Indigenous author telling the story? And what is their relationship to community, to the people, or to their self? Do they have cultural protocols that they're following for sharing this story? So for example, you can have an Indigenous person share another Indigenous person's story, but do they have permission for that? We just want to make sure that sharing is continue to be done in a good way. And that means that we have to be open to mistakes. There might be resources that we come across that we truly love, but we can't keep using because things happen and we learn and we continue to learn. And that just means approaching stuff with an open heart. And next, okay, so from BC, from the North Vancouver BC school curriculum, I connected our curricular competencies for Indigenous learning, how at every single level for math learning, there is an expectation for educators to incorporate First Peoples perspectives. So that's like from K to pre-calc, every single level of our curriculum incorporates First Peoples perspectives of learning. So that was just like a reminder. Yes, it is in your curriculum. It was recommended to me that when it comes to thinking about incorporating numeracy into teaching practices, to consider the big ideas first. So no matter what you're doing, no matter where you are and what your life is like in the whole world, you are counting, you are locating, you are measuring stuff, you are playing, you are explaining, and all these things are part of math. And it might not feel like you're doing math, but estimating, like trying to think about how far can I travel before I run out of gas, that's math. So like thinking about how these like big idea terms can apply as part of the real world into what you're teaching in the class. Because as mentioned before, kids will ask, why do I have to learn this? And the reason is, I'm like, well, you're living it. And just reminding them about that is one way to make it a little bit more relational or related context. The two Indigenous authentic resources that we picked to look over are Richard Van Camp's What's the Most Beautiful Thing You Know About Horses? Which if you ever open this book, it's an amazing book. There's like no math problems that are evident in there. It's like, it doesn't look like math. It just looks like a picture book. However, our goal with this workshop is to inspire educators to consider finding math in the places that they might not be looking for it. So opening a picture book, you might not think like, okay, where's the math problem? Well, it's in there. Trust, you just have to get a little bit creative. One of the things that I did was while teaching kids is to ask them, where's the most beautiful place to sit with nature? And they would explain to me, oh, well, I want to take you to this spot here. There's enough space for us to sit. Oh, like this, like normally I sit here, but you can't sit here because you're like a grown-up and that branch is not going to hold your weight. I'm like, that's math. There's math happening in all that world, and their little brains are already talking about it. And they're excited to talk to you about it. Opening the book up, some examples are, for example, today it is 40 below. Richard Van Camp talks to us what 40 below means, but even just this one page at a time, you don't have to go through the whole book. You can just pick and choose what's going to work for your lesson today. How can you get inspired from each page on that text for one lesson at a time, talking about temperature. The idea that you have a definition for what zero is, plus and negative, like plus and minus, positive and negative, going down the scale. This can be the opening page to inspire you and your kids to learn more about what does temperature mean. And we had initially thought of this for like elementary school learners. However, picture books are for everyone. Story is for everyone. So you can approach this with secondary level learners as well. This section of the book talks about being half native, and it's like, all right, so you can talk about what fractions are, but you can also open up to the conversation about decolonialism. What does it mean, blood quantum? How does this affect people? What is Indian status really mean? And how do you find a person? These can be like really intense, really fruitful conversations. And hey, we got it from a book. Let me see. Oh yeah, I'm gonna skip this page in the interest of time, because there was just so much to talk about. This workshop was like an hour. So we had so much fun picking apart different parts of the book and getting inspired and finding where the math is, even from passages that did not particularly seem very forward mathy. I do want to say that one of the creative aspects that was was very fun was to be like, okay, like let's find the math and more than just like count horses, because we can all count how many horses are in the book, but where does this ignite the passion? Where does this ignite the fun? Math should be fun. I hated math. I was one of those kids who suffered, and you don't have to. It doesn't have to be that way. I'm going to go real quick. The second book that we talked about was Stand Like Cedar. This particular book, I want to focus in on the idea of the senses. This book takes us through the different seasons and transformation. And talking about the stories of the land. Sorry, I'm going really quick, really quick. But I want to get to the particular idea of talking about the senses, because we attributed this book to the idea of talking about hunting practices and how hunters would use their senses. You could provide students with a map, a circle map, putting your individual in the middle, and ask the kids, like, what do you see? And then have them with whatever kind of level they're comfortable with, because this could be applicable and flexible for different grades. They could draw, they could write. What do you see that's around you? Describe your surroundings. How is it closer? Is it near? Is it farther? This is part of mapping. An Indigenous perspective is to consider space and how we don't particularly use the cardinal directions, not necessarily, at least not here on the West Coast. We use upriver, downriver. It's all about our connection to nature. So how about we take some time and look around and see what nature has to teach us. Consider the sounds of nature. What do you hear? Listening, taking that extra time to, I'm not slowing down, but taking that extra time to slow down and take in as much environment as you can. What are we learning from there? How do we depict this? What kind of symbols can we use to depict this? How do math people use symbols to depict abstract ideas and thoughts on paper? Opening up the conversation to what those could mean. Same thing with smells. We don't hang around and just, smell the flowers. I think we should. All this is me connecting it to the BC curriculum, English language arts competencies, how even throughout every level, every grade level, there is discussions about awareness and recognition of First Peoples relationships to narrative and story and family and land. So it's what this could be is fulfilling part of that and also doing it in a good way. I also provided, what is this? Oh, yeah, an idea of thinking about perspectives. How are you going to look at the land if you're an Indigenous person? How would you look at the land if you're a tourist? All these cool ideas to start bringing in stuff like literacy, but that's, we're here for numeracy, so we're going to skip that idea. I also provided opportunities for folks to catch on math resources, especially if they've never heard it. There's the FNESC, First Nations Education Steering Committee's math resources that are excellent. A lot of these were borrowed from, or a lot of ideas used in this presentation were borrowed directly from those particular resources. We also have all their math stuff that we're working on with the Indigenous Math Education Network. Lots of things that are exciting and hopefully inspire people to consider, how can we look at our world and see where the math is in a way that puts the story stuff first, and then finds like the curiosity, because being curious is how you solve those problems. And that is it.
So kind of add on to even with the label math, this is where Indigenous cultures, we don't actually have that label of math. So the culture part, each of the page sounded like a cedar tree. I read that with my students. For a lot of our urban students, for some of our kids who are not connected to their community, a lot of that went over their head because they don't have those life experiences. So, really taking your time with getting to know the story, and you don't have to rush things, because I feel like in the education system, everything's so fast paced, and to digest all of that information, there's so much cultural stuff in these books that it's just, you can go through so many different avenues with both of those two books that we use.
And you could use other books too, because if you look at your resource, ask your librarians, what kind of picture books do you got? This particular technique of finding the math in authentic resources is flexible enough that if you're looking for the puzzles and the curiosity, you will be able to find it because you are professionals.
Also, just building those relationships with the Indigenous team in your district, or other districts even. So like Johanna and myself.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And, I do some work with children's picture books, and that idea that you can come back to a book, multiple times and spend time with it, and not, just read it once and, move on to things. And there's so many layers in the text and the illustrations, and, children hear and think about more things the more they hear the story. So, it becomes a bit of a living document, the children's book in your classrooms. I'm going to ask Johanna and Brandi if they wouldn't mind stop sharing their screen. And then we'll open it up for questions and conversation. Thank you so much for sharing. Stephanie was monitoring the chat. Are there any questions that have come up, Stephanie, or questions that you have for our presenters?
No questions coming up yet. I'll keep looking. I actually have some questions. I love how you talked a little bit about your process in choosing a book and making sure that the stories you're choosing are appropriately picked. And I guess I'm wondering about your process and how you go about unpacking a book once you've found one that you think would be really, really good. How do you go about finding the connections? What's your process to, I guess, bringing it into a lesson?
I can give you like a little sample, like not with the math specifically, but like my literacy kids, that's what mostly I've been focusing on this year. We've been since January, really, my intermediates, we've been exploring leadership, Indigenous leadership, and through story. But like I went through a list of like, okay, maybe these books could work. And then I only really managed to get through about 5 of them, if that. And then we kept revisiting the books and the stories and the teachings to continue with our little project that we're working on. But a part of it, it was just like just revisiting things, because there's so much knowledge within just, even one page, like, just even talking about who the authors are on top of the subject in the book, and all the things that they've accomplished in their own life as well. So there's just a lot on each page when I think about that. You have this big idea, and then you have to kind of scale it back again, and some of it might not work. Like really the kids just gravitated to a few of the books rather than all the ones that we shared. So I kind of like really let the students lead that part of it, rather than just me choosing, okay, this is what the book that we're going to choose. But I kind of let the kids kind of guide and see where their interests were.
That's really important. And I was thinking about the question, and like one of the things that really helps is if your students are curious themselves about something. So if they are gravitating toward a particular book and they're interested and they want to learn more, and they're starting to ask questions like, why is this the way this is? And be like, well, that's a question about our world. Let's see if we can solve some of those questions with math. And therefore, it's kind of like their interest is leading into where the problems are sort of coming from. And I feel like math is flexible enough to be able to stretch to whatever your lesson needs are, because it is everywhere all around us. And it does take some practice to be able to see the math in the world, or the math in books, especially if it's not immediately apparent. But because I had to read the Richard Van Camp book a couple times before I'm like, wait, temperature is like, there could be a lesson talking and explaining what that is, and then taking measurement. What does this particularly mean? And that can just be like the in before you start talking about temperature, rather than just starting cold turkey, like, okay, we're going to talk about, this is what temperature is. Because that was the thing that I struggled with. I'm like, why do I need to learn a clock? Like lunchtime and dinner time are the main things that actually matter. But maybe if it was connected to story and kids are already curious and asking questions, that helps the process a little bit more.
Yeah, and continuing that, like it's also connected to the land. Well, like, the seasonal rounds on the land, and when plants are coming, and it's going to be different in different territories as well. So, knowing the temperature and the math in there it's there, and those teachings are, are with the community really, and with the people. So reaching out to folks as well. Yeah.
I think, Brandi, you raised a good point. And I know, having read Dr. Joanne Archibald's Indigenous story work, that's part of the learning that we need to do before we share a story, is like, what are the practices? What from the land? What are the, what is the knowledge that the land holds that the story is from? Where is the author from? And, sort of what is their cultural background? And I know from a math lens, it could be the same thing. Like when you read a story, like, okay, where is the math here? What do I notice? What can I play with mathematically before I share this with my students? They may come up with another connection, as kids do in conversation, but to be, proactive and prepare yourself a little bit for what math might emerge and where you might go with that, I think is part of that being story work ready.
I love that. Yeah, thank you so much. There is a question in the chat here, and in the meantime, I will put a link to the feedback forum. So if you'd like to complete that, that would be lovely. So Andrea says, I'm curious about the patterns on the left margin of the horses book. Is there a purposeful connection outside of stylistic art?
Okay, so you can go in on Indigenous artistic representation. There is a lot to talk about, and each like community will have its own specific art expression. Like where there's a difference between Coast Salish art and Northwest coastal art, and training your eye to be able to recognize that difference is part of understanding that cultural diversity. So there is some purpose in there. The reason why I went through that slide so fast, but that particular slide and the patterning is because the text on that page was talking about how like what's the most beautiful thing you know about horses. Oh, I love the Appaloosa horse because it's got freckles. And then the author talks about how he's nervous about his freckles until his mom said that freckles are a kiss from God. And I'm like, oh, how sweet is that? But also it makes you asking, like, why do we have freckles? What is going on there? What are freckles? Why is it helpful to have spots? And then what other animals have spots? And I mean, these are just questions, but some of these can be answered with math. Like, you get freckles because you get sun exposure. What's sun exposure? Well, now you can start talking about UV rays and what that kind of represents. Now you can start talking about melanin and start going into that cultural conversation that actually darker skin, brown skin spots is a response from the UV in your skin. And that's kind of like protecting you. That's like love from the creator, some protection of your skin from the UV rays. There's connections there. I mean, so, and in the patterns on the side, we're thinking about what other kind of patterns are there? How do they emerge? What does this kind of happen? These are just questions, and I don't have all the answers to them, but my purpose, especially with this, or I should say Brandi and I's purpose, especially with this workshop, is to like inspire teachers who are familiar with math to start forming some ideas to help understand where these questions are. If kids are curious, then they're going to ask questions and they want to learn. Whereas if you say, like, let's do this drill and do this worksheet, and there's a disconnection and there's not a relationship between the knowledge that they're learning and outside of the classroom setting, then it's like some kids pick it up and that's really awesome. Some of them need to understand why, and taking that time to explain, well, here's one reason why, and put that first. That was the reasoning behind the pattern page. I hope that helps explain that question.
I really appreciated, talking about, I use the Finesse website for looking for different books. And I'd say my approach has really changed in the last 2 or 3 years, because previously I'd look at the math curriculum and be like, okay, we're doing percent. I need to find a Indigenous story on percents. And
you will have a hard time doing that.
Exactly. So it's much more effective. I've learned to like just find really good texts first and then see where it leads you in the math. I'm much more successful going that direction than the other way around. And if you, I don't know if you've experienced that as well, or sometimes when you go shopping for certain themes, that's not the way you find books where they tell you the theme off the top. So you kind of have to explore them as you go.
Thank you for that connection. All right, we have come to the end of our time. I hope that you've all enjoyed your time today at the Indigenous Math Education Symposium. Stephanie has put the feedback form link in the chat. I know Cynthia will also email it out to you. And thank you for joining us. Thank you to our speakers. We so appreciate you taking the time to prepare and share your projects and your thinking this afternoon. Thank you, everyone.